Body recomposition, building muscle while losing fat simultaneously, is exactly what these 4 peer-reviewed strategies deliver. They increased my lean mass, reduced my body fat, and never required eating in a massive calorie surplus. The science behind all 4 has been peer-reviewed, replicated, and largely ignored by the fitness industry because it doesn't sell a complicated program. For decades, the fitness world handed everyone the same rule: eat more to gain muscle, eat less to lose fat, and never attempt both at the same time. I believed that rule without questioning it for years, and if you've spent any time in gyms or fitness communities, you probably heard the same thing. But when researchers actually tested that belief in controlled trials, it didn't hold up. Not partially, not in some edge cases, but at the most fundamental level of how the body actually works. What I'm walking through today is body recomposition, what it actually is, who it works best for, and the 4 pillars that made it happen for me. Every claim in this video comes from peer-reviewed research, no bro science, no supplement company funding, just the evidence. If you've ever wanted to build muscle without watching your body fat climb at the same time, stay with me, because this is exactly what the science says about how to do it. And if a real structured bulk is what you're after, my program is linked below. No fluff, built around the science. Body recomposition carries a formal scientific definition, and when I first read it, it reframed everything I thought I understood about training. Researchers define it as the simultaneous process of reducing body fat while maintaining or increasing lean mass, frequently with no meaningful change in total body weight on the scale. That last part is what most people miss entirely. You can weigh the exact same number for months and look completely different, which is also why tracking body weight alone tells you almost nothing useful about what's actually happening inside your body. The reason the pick one myth survived this long comes down to incentives rather than evidence. Bulking programs sell and cutting programs sell, but a recomposition approach that says eat at a moderate deficit, train hard, sleep well, and be patient doesn't move product the same way, and that's where the problem starts. A 2020 paper published in the Strength and Conditioning Journal by Christopher Barakat, Bill Campbell, and colleagues address this directly. Despite the widespread belief that well-trained individuals cannot gain muscle and lose fat at the same time, many randomized controlled trials in resistance-trained individuals have demonstrated that body recomposition is entirely possible. What kept the myth alive wasn't the evidence, it was the inconvenience of the truth for everyone profiting from the alternative. And once you understand that clearly, the pick one rule stops looking like science and starts looking like a sales strategy. Before getting into the 4 pillars, there needs to be an honest conversation about who benefits most from recomposition, because the research draws distinctions that are worth understanding before setting your expectations. Beginners and untrained individuals get the most dramatic results, and the mechanism behind that is straightforward. When someone is new to resistance training, muscles respond so aggressively to the novel stimulus that they grow even in a calorie deficit, pulling the energy needed for new tissue directly from fat stores. That biological mechanic is well documented across the literature, and it's the reason beginner gains are real rather than anecdotal. Detrained and returning lifters sit in the second best position because muscle regrows far faster than it took to initially build, a phenomenon the research calls muscle memory. And it's a documented physiological response rather than a motivational metaphor. The third group surprised me when I first encountered it in the research. People carrying higher levels of body fat benefit strongly from recomposition, and the reason is direct. More stored body fat means more accessible energy during a deficit, and that stored energy becomes the fuel source for building new muscle tissue while eating less. Reading that finding was the first time I stopped treating my starting body fat level as purely a problem to fix, and started seeing it as a mechanical advantage the research actually supported. Advanced lifters can still recompose, and I want to be clear about that. But the rate slows considerably as existing muscle mass increases, and being honest about that expectation matters more than glossing over it. At the extreme end of leanness, competitive bodybuilders and contest prep found in research that muscle loss became nearly inevitable once they surpassed a certain threshold of body fat reduction. That ceiling exists, but it's one most people watching this video will never actually approach. Nothing else in this video matters if protein intake isn't handled correctly, and I mean that without any softening. The research doesn't hedge on this point, and I stopped hedging on it in my own diet the moment I understood what the evidence actually showed. Both the International Society of Sports Nutrition and the American College of Sports Medicine put the protein target for exercising individuals between 1.4 and 2.0 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, moving well beyond the standard recommended daily allowance of 0.8 grams per kilogram, a number set for sedentary adults that becomes inadequate the moment consistent training enters the picture. My personal target lands at the upper end of that research-backed range, 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram, every day without exception. Writing down 1.62 grams per kilogram per day matters, because this is where the research draws a line worth understanding. Morton's 2017 British Journal of Sports Medicine meta-analysis of 49 studies covering 1,863 participants found that protein supplementation increased fat-free mass and muscle size during resistance training, but beyond total intakes of 1.62 grams per kilogram per day, no further muscle gains appeared. Nearly 2,000 research subjects produced that ceiling, and it tells you precisely where the effort on protein stops paying off. What's especially important is focusing on high leucine protein sources, because leucine acts as the primary trigger for muscle protein synthesis through the mTOR pathway, the master switch that signals your body to build new muscle tissue. This is why resistance training combined with adequate leucine-rich protein creates such a powerful stimulus for growth. Pre-sleep protein is a strategy I added to my own routine after reading the research, and it gets far less attention than it deserves. Dr. Tim Snyders at Maastricht University, publishing in the Journal of Nutrition in 2015, showed that 20 to 40 grams of casein protein before sleep stimulates whole body protein synthesis overnight in both young and older adults. And here's what made me act on it immediately. It doesn't reduce morning appetite or alter resting energy expenditure. Researchers essentially identified a free anabolic window that most people are sleeping through without taking advantage of it. For anyone carrying extra body fat and wanting to build muscle at the same time, a 2024 meta-analysis across 47 studies with over 3,200 participants found that increased protein intake prevents muscle mass decline in adults targeting weight loss, and that conclusion held consistently across all those participants. High protein intake is the single most protective tool for muscle tissue during a cut, and when 3,000 research subjects point in the same direction, that's not a finding worth dismissing. 3 to 4 resistance training sessions per week is where the evidence lands for recomposition, and 2024 research added something to the training structure conversation that I didn't anticipate when I first started digging into this. Full body routines appear to produce greater fat mass loss compared to traditional split routines, which gave me a genuine reason to reconsider how I was organizing my training week, and the shift has been worth it. Progressive overload sits at the center of everything I do in the gym, and the concept is direct. Gradually increase the stress on the musculoskeletal and nervous system over time, because that progression is what forces adaptation. Without it, maintenance is the ceiling. With it, growth becomes the outcome. What the research reveals about how to achieve that progression turns out to be more flexible than most people assume, and a 2022 study made that case clearly by comparing two 10-week programs head-to-head. One group progressively increased the weight lifted, while the other progressively increased their reps, and both groups grew their 1-rep max values and cross-sectional muscle area with no meaningful difference between them. The method of progression matters far less than the consistency of actually progressing week over week, and that finding is one I rely on when training needs to adjust around life rather than the other way around. For tracking intensity, using RPE minus rate of perceived exertion on a scale of 1 to 10 helps ensure you're working hard enough to stimulate adaptation while managing recovery between sessions. On load specifically, a 2024 study on postmenopausal women found that after 24 weeks, the groups performing higher load exercises showed greater recomposition results than the lower load group, with all groups losing visceral fat, but heavier training producing better outcomes overall. Researchers found that pattern holding across different populations, which is why I prioritize challenging weights on compound movements rather than defaulting to lighter loads when sessions get difficult. One more thing worth addressing directly, because I held the opposite belief for years. Combining resistance training with cardio, what researchers call concurrent training, is validated as an effective approach for optimizing body recomposition. The fear that cardio destroys muscle gains is widespread in lifting communities, and that fear kept me away from it longer than it should have. But the evidence doesn't support it when training is structured with any reasonable intelligence. Two groups need to sit with the evidence here, and I say that having spent meaningful time on both sides before the research corrected me, people eating massive surpluses to maximize gains, and people eating almost nothing to cut faster. Both approaches work against the data in ways that are clearly documented. Starting with the surplus side, researchers have actually quantified the biological cost of building muscle tissue, and the number stopped me cold the first time I encountered it. Building a gram of muscle costs roughly 3 to 4.6 kilocalories. And for an intermediate lifter gaining 2 to 4 pounds of muscle across an entire year, the total energetic cost of depositing all that new tissue lands between 3,450 and 9,800 kilocalories for the full year. Spread across 365 days, that works out to 10 to 27 extra calories per day. Not 500 extra, not 1,000 extra, but 10 to 27. A 2023 paper published in PMC then answered what eating dramatically beyond that small biological requirement actually accomplishes. Energy surpluses in the 5 to 15% range primarily increase the rate of fat accumulation rather than the rate of muscle growth or strength gain. During my old bulking phases, I wasn't building more muscle by eating aggressively. I was storing more fat, and the data on that point carries no ambiguity. On the extreme deficit side, a study found that eating at roughly 80% of estimated energy requirements reduced muscle protein synthesis by 16% at rest, even with moderate protein intake maintained throughout. A single resistance training session partially restored that synthesis, and that finding is one of the clearest mechanistic arguments for training during a deficit, rather than simply eating less and resting. The same research showed that adding 15 to 30 grams of protein post-exercise in a deficit elevated muscle protein synthesis, approximately 30% above resting levels, reinforcing how powerfully training and protein interact, even when calories are restricted. The target I follow now, and the one the evidence supports for recomposition, is a moderate deficit of 300 to 500 calories, below your TDEE, total daily energy expenditure. Not aggressive restriction, and not a dramatic surplus. Just a moderate, sustainable deficit held consistently over time. That specific range, combined with high protein and consistent training, is where researchers consistently find recomposition happening. Most people in the fitness world treat sleep as optional, fitting it around everything else and accepting whatever hours are left over. Researchers don't treat it that way, and once I read what the studies actually showed, my approach shifted to protecting sleep with the same discipline I bring to training sessions. A 2021 study published in Physiological Reports by Lemon and colleagues used a randomized crossover design in healthy young adults and produced numbers that are hard to set aside. Acute sleep deprivation reduced muscle protein synthesis by 18%, pushed plasma cortisol up by 21%, and dropped plasma testosterone by 24%. And every one of those consequences came from one bad night of sleep, not a week of chronic restriction, not months of poor habits, but one night. If you've ever wondered why a rough night leaves your training feeling completely off the following day, those 3 numbers explain the biology behind it. The study that permanently changed how I think about this came from 2010, when Nedelcheva and colleagues published findings in the Annals of Internal Medicine. 2 groups followed identical calorie-restricted diets. Same food, same deficit, same total caloric intake across the board, with sleep duration as the only separating variable. The group sleeping 8.5 hours per night lost primarily fat, while the group limited to 5.5 hours lost 60% more muscle mass and 55% less fat than the well-rested group, all on the same diet and the same calorie deficit, with completely different body composition outcomes, determined entirely by how long each group slept. That result made me understand that every other pillar covered in this video can be actively undermined from the bedroom, and it's the reason I no longer treat sleep as a lifestyle preference. The mechanism runs through growth hormone, with approximately 80% of total 24-hour growth hormone release occurring during the first 90 minutes of slow-wave sleep. Every time you cut your night short, you cut off the primary hormonal window the body uses for tissue repair and growth. Short periods of sleep restriction under a week can compromise glucose metabolism and reduce insulin sensitivity, pushing the body toward fat storage rather than fat burning, while elevating ghrelin and making your diet harder to manage at the exact moment it's already been biologically undermined. Sleep isn't recovery from your program. Based on what the research shows, sleep is a core part of the program itself. The 2024 research on creatine is compelling enough to cover briefly because the body composition data coming out of recent meta-analyses made a stronger case than I expected when I first looked into it. A 2024 grade-assessed systematic review and dose-response meta-analysis across 143 studies found that creatine supplementation increased body mass by 0.86 kilograms and fat-free mass by 0.82 kilograms, while reducing body fat percentage by 0.28%. A separate 2024 meta-analysis in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, reviewing 12 randomized controlled trials, found that creatine users gained an average of 1.14 kilograms more lean body mass and reduced body fat mass by 0.7 kilograms and body fat percentage by 0.9% compared to resistance training alone. Those changes held regardless of training experience or total training volume, and that last detail is the one worth emphasizing. Researchers found the benefit consistent across different training backgrounds, rather than reserved for any specific tier of athlete. The dosing the evidence supports is straightforward: 5 to 7 grams per day after an optional loading phase, with no carbohydrates added, because the research shows no additional benefit from doing so. My own routine follows that recommendation exactly. The safety record behind creatine monohydrate rests on randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trials, consistently finding it safe in both young adults and older populations, and regulatory approval for it as a dietary supplement exists across Canada, Australia, the European Union, Japan, South Korea, Brazil, and numerous other countries. On top of an already solid training and nutrition foundation, it consistently delivers measurable body composition improvements, and that's exactly how I treat it in my own routine. Not a shortcut, just a well-documented addition that earned its place through the evidence. The idea that gaining muscle requires gaining fat, that the two are biologically inseparable and you have to choose a direction, was never supported by the research. Researchers never established that rule. It was a simplification that hardened into dogma because it was easy to sell and because the actual answer requires patience and consistency rather than a dramatic protocol that can be packaged and marketed to someone wanting fast results. Body recomposition is documented across dozens of peer-reviewed studies, and the framework for achieving it is not complicated. Every day without exception, I eat 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. 3 to 4 times per week, I train with progressive overload, consistently adding either weight or reps to keep adaptation happening. My calorie intake sits at a moderate deficit of 300 to 500 calories below maintenance, not aggressive restriction and not a dramatic surplus. Sleep gets protected with the same discipline I bring to the gym, because when the 2010 Nedelcheva study showed that sleep duration alone could determine whether a calorie deficit consumed fat or muscle, the argument was settled. Sleep is not recovery from the program. Sleep is part of the program. The fitness industry profits from complexity, and the research rewards consistency. These 4 pillars, executed over time without dramatic interventions or expensive protocols, are what the evidence actually supports, and they're what worked for me. Now you have the same framework and the same science behind it, and what happens next is entirely up to you. If you want a done-for-you bulking program built on this exact science, link is in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.